Thank you, Donna. As Donna said, my name is Ann Williams, and I'm the Information Security Education and Awareness Manager at BankUnited. First, let me say thank you to everyone for joining us today on this talk. The topic is Welcome to the Security Team, Why You Are Our First Line of Defense. Today, our guest speaker is Felipe Medina, who I have the pleasure of working with at BankUnited. Felipe is the Vice President of Cybersecurity Management at BankUnited. He is responsible for establishing and maintaining a corporate-wide information security technology program to ensure that the information assets of our bank are adequately protected, both on premises and within the cloud. This includes having an up-to-date understanding of the latest security threats, trends, and technologies, managing and supporting existing security solutions, and evaluating, designing, and implementing new technical security controls to meet our security objectives. Before we get started, I just want to talk about some housekeeping. Audience, we are encouraging you please to use the chat feature to ask questions. Felipe is here to answer as many questions as possible, time permitting. Felipe, I'll turn it over to you now to get started.
All right. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you all for going ahead and making the time to go ahead and join our webinar. I'm going to go ahead and get started in just one moment here. So we're going to show you some tips and tricks to become a human firewall, how to secure remotely connected networks. We're going to demonstrate a phishing attack and demonstrate a hacking console post-exploitation, which means after a hacker has taken basically control of your system. So we'll just go ahead and get right to it and see if we can go ahead and play some catch up as we go. So identification versus authentication. So identification requires a human to intercede, verify that they are who they say they are. Authentication, right, may or may not be who the person is, right? But they have indeed given a correct combination. So you have two little graphics here that I think are pretty humorous, right? Using the username and password of admin, it's basically like putting a Cheetos on a latch and or having a see-through mat where you have a backup key, right? It is one of the more commonly used vectors and or consoles that go ahead and use that. So, understanding that there's two types of authentication methodologies, right? You have authentication, single factor, and authorization. What this means is it's a simple username and passwords. A lot of technologies now are leveraging multi-factor. So let's say you go ahead and use our banking application, right? You can enroll to go ahead and do multi-factor. And what multi-factor does is it's a two-factor authentication. That doesn't just go ahead and take a username and password, but it says, okay, you have the username and password, you understand how to log in, but now I want you to prove to me that you are who you say you are. And that's what multi-factor does, right? It allows us to go ahead and have a second way of verifying that you are who you say you are, right? By having something physical that the person that signed up for said account owns. And I don't know if there's any questions or anything that you want to go ahead and do that. I want to try to make this as interactive as possible.
Okay, Felipe, yes, we do have one here. The question is, what is the best method for securing access to any banking system and why?
So getting to exactly what we're discussing here, right? Multi-factor is going to be definitely one of those, right? Being able to go ahead and secure by going ahead and saying you are who you say you are, right? And having a second factor, right? That second factor could go ahead and be in the form of a token. It could be in the form of a phone call to your phone that gives you a 6-digit code or something that you can plug in. That way, there's no single way that a username and a password could be used to just go ahead and log into any of your banking systems. All right.
Yes.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and proceed. So potential authentication and access problems. So this is basically transitive access. This is if you are a business, right? You're going to go ahead and have parties that you trust, right? And a transitive access trust means that you trust another party. And if the second party has other connections to another party, and that relationship on that third party gets compromised, it also goes ahead and compromises your connectivity, right? So if you are a business, right, that is going ahead and doing brokering services or whatnot, this is one of those transitive access and trust issues that you have to go ahead and keep in mind. The best way to go ahead and sit down and think of this is when Sony got hacked. A couple of years back, Sony got hacked, right? And Sony had direct access to some of the cable providers. I was brought in at that moment. I was going ahead and contracting. I was brought in to a particular cable provider, and the CIO and the CISO were like, "Sony's been hacked. What do we do?" And I said, "Unplug the network." They had a direct line into Sony, so they basically unplugged the internet link that Sony had into them, and this went away. But it's important to go ahead and understand that it's not just your usernames and passwords, it's any connections as a business that you may have. Moving forward, a lot of gripes are given to security because we use expirations and rotations. So, the password expiration is covered by password policies that we have, and it serves two purposes, right? One, the time to crack a password is estimated to be about 100 days, right? If the password expiration of that 100 days, let's say, is less than those 100 days, we, in effect, ensure that there's insufficient time for a hacker to crack your password, right? And then number two, if a password has been compromised, requiring it to be changed regularly allows us to go ahead and limit the amount of access and the amount of time that hacker or attacker has within your network. So it's important to go ahead and understand that this is a control point so that we limit the amount of access and the amount of ability to compromise a malicious user would have within the network. So guidelines for password management, right? So, one of the basic things that we're always going ahead and discussing is how long should a password be? My answer, standard, is as long as you can make it. That would go ahead and make it feasible for you. And the reason for that is, as you go ahead and sit down and take a look at this slide, there's a lot that goes into this, right? You can have 7 characters in 29 milliseconds using quantum computing nowadays. It could go ahead and be used as a service. We can go ahead and crack that in milliseconds. However, if you grab those 7 characters, make them 12 characters, and you go ahead and use a phrase, not necessarily a password, you're going ahead and exponentially making it take up to a year or longer. Once you start combining letters and numbers, right, you go from a blink of an eye to several years that it would take. And you also see on the bottom here, one such example. The word password with a capital P can be cracked in under the time it takes for a lightning strike. However, just changing a couple of those characters takes about 14 years to go ahead and sit down and grab every password combination to go ahead and just have a password like that. And then, of course, malicious users prey on what we call in the industry social engineering. They prey on your personality types. That social engineering will go ahead and sit down and be something that they can get you to do without going ahead and forcing your hand on that. Oftentimes in the past, when I used to go ahead and sit down and do penetration testing, I would go ahead and sprinkle USBs in parking lots. Why? Well, some of those would go ahead and be, Taylor Swift's newest album. I'm trying to entice the user to do something, plug that in, and click on something so that I can go ahead and take ownership of the system. So the age-old adage, if it's too good to be true, it probably is.
Oh, Felipe, we have a question here.
Sure.
Since passwords are so important, we should make them, as long as possible and so forth. Any suggestion on how to keep them safe?
Yeah, so we'll be covering that later on with both some commercial tools as well as some tools that you can personally use. But one of the most common things that I go ahead and sit down and advise is use a password vault. Do not go ahead and keep your passwords on a sheet of paper. And I'm not being facetious here when I say this, because my wife used to go ahead and keep her passwords on a sheet of paper until one day that I had an oops moment and spilt a cup of water all over them. And then we proceeded to go ahead and get her a password vault. So it's tough. It takes some time and training, but it will go ahead and save you, right? To go ahead and sit down and do that. And most password vaults also generate passwords for you. All right, I'll move on. So everyone's heard of a VPN, right? And why is it that VPNs are so important? Well, VPNs stand for Virtual Private Network, and it secures your network connections and encrypts all the traffic between the machine and the network destination, right? What this means is it doesn't matter if someone's on the network sniffing. If you're using a VPN, everything's encrypted through that tunnel, and they will not be able to go ahead and crack anything. It'll be a bunch of jumbles there. So this is a common thing that if you're using a corporate computer or a business computer and you have a VPN, don't go to Starbucks and not turn on the VPN. Always use that VPN, because all you're doing is going ahead and at that point encrypting all the traffic in such a manner that if someone was browsing around on the network and trying to find your traffic, you would not go ahead and be the lowest hit on the totem pole there, right? What'll end up happening is they'll go ahead and go on to an easier user that is not doing that. So if at all possible, when you have the opportunity, always use a VPN so that you're encrypting the traffic. So, some fundamentals, right? As I was saying, always use a VPN and consistently reassess. And what that means is always reassess whether or not you need to go ahead and have connectivity or not, and assess whether or not you need to go ahead and leave the systems on or not. Obviously, there's needs that corporate computers need to have to go ahead and get patches and updates, right? But whenever not possible, right? Don't leave the computer on, right? It's just, it's number one, right? Always follow corporate policy there. But if you don't need to go ahead and have the machine on, your best bet is to go ahead and just simply reassess whether it needs to be connected to the network or not. So securing mobile devices, this is very similar to computers, right? Nowadays, mobile devices are leveraging, what's called BYOD, or bring your own device at corporations. What this means is mobile devices remain the critical component for your online identity. Think of, Instagram, Facebook, and other social media. It's on your phone, right? So not all applications are vetted, and you need to go ahead and take a look at all of the permissions, right, that the applications are asking for. Some applications require access to your phone book, others do not. And I always reassess whether or not that application's needed or not. It was usually an Android feature, but iOS as of 14.7, I believe, allows you to go ahead and do the same thing now, right? Which means you can take control of your security. Updates are critical. There was a critical iOS update to 14.78 that went ahead and mitigated a critical flaw where someone could go ahead and sit down and take control of your phone remotely by just sending you a text message. You did not have to click it or anything. So Whenever you see an update, always try to update to the latest and greatest, because there's a lot of security updates that are there. Going back to authentication, always use applications that have MFA and enable MFA whenever needed, and install security software. Yes, oftentimes you may go ahead and see a little bit of a slowdown, but it's so much better than to go ahead and have a virus or a worm that requires you to go ahead and completely wipe your phone and everything that's in it. So one of those such that I use, my mobile provider provides me Lookout for Mobile, and it's free, and it gives me a solution where I can go ahead and have an antivirus on my phone just in case I do something that wasn't supposed to go ahead and be done. Any questions, Anne?
So yes, Felipe, from our audience, I guess password is a very popular topic. You had mentioned about a password vault, and we have two questions here related that you could probably answer this at one time. Is a password vault something you purchase, or is it an app?
Both.
Yeah,
that's the question. That's the answer. So there's free password vaulting softwares out there that you can use. I would go ahead and err on the side of caution to go ahead and use industry standards, right? And free is not always better, right? So, you know, I would say that there's paid versions, right? And there's free versions. Free versions often go ahead and come with stipulations like adware or whatnot that gets installed for you to use. But, you know, always be cognizant of what platform you're going to use. And, you know, again, you know, there's even password vaults that were free and or paid have been hacked in the past, right? We won't get into names and whatnot, but, you know, there was password managers that had issues. And those password vaulting programs are on the IS naughty list, let's just say. But you could go ahead and pay for them and remove the ads and or, you know, the amount of times that you can use it in a month. Or you can go ahead and get free ones that don't have that. But always, you know, take a gander, whatever's better for you. For an enterprise, I would go with a paid version that could be centrally managed by your IT/IS team. But, you know, again, personally, you could use the free ones, right, for your own personal bills and whatnot. Just understand the caveats here. All right, we'll move on. So we're going to go ahead and get into the nitty gritty that I told you we would get into, which is phishing email scams. So one of the things to go ahead and note, right? Let's say you get an email, right? And this email, right? You see that it comes from LinkedIn. Everything looks pretty legitimate here, right? It tells you a lot about the person, Kevin Mitnick, that if you don't know, I would tell you that we call him the grandfather of hacking. He evaded the FBI for years by calling in tips on himself and then watching the FBI raid his apartments, and stayed one step ahead until he got caught. Now he owns a security company, a security consulting company. So anyone that knows security knows of this person. So, you know, it's enticing the security nerd in me when I go ahead and get this email. So the next thing that I go ahead and do is I clicked on the link. And now it looks pretty legitimate. I mean, you take a look at the link, it looks like if it's LinkedIn. And I'm going to go ahead and sit down and put in my username and password. Really what's happening, right, at this point is your MFA kicks in. And this MFA starts going ahead and saying, hey, are you really who you say you are? Let's go ahead and check. And in the background, you've already been compromised. And I'm seeing all of that information because I sent you to my site and I'm going ahead and proxying everything through my computer. So as you can see here, I just got everything so that I can go ahead and impersonate you online. So this is very important, right? One of the biggest lessons is if you click over that link, right? And if you look, It wasn't LinkedIn. It looked like LinkedIn, but it was not a LinkedIn link. So that's one of the things to go ahead and sit down and really take into account is don't just click on a link. And I know that a lot of times we're in a hurry and we want to go ahead and do things, but that's how something like this would happen. So any questions?
Okay, let me see. So Felipe, here we have one from the audience. It says, we've all heard about phishing emails, but what about smishing and vishing? Can you tell us briefly what those are? Is it similar to a phishing email?
It is. So smishing and vishing is the SMS variant of phishing. So what will end up happening is you'll get a random text that'll entice you to go ahead and click on a link. And usually they use URL shorteners for that. So it'll end with bit.ly. If you don't know who sent you that, never click on it because it's just the same as an email that was not solicited, right? And vishing is a very similar thing that's happening through voice. So someone will go ahead and call you and entice you to go ahead and sit down and do something. We all get that, expired car warranty calls, right? That's one of those things that happen, right? But it's predominantly when we see these types of attacks, they'll go ahead and sit down and have your Apple ID, and they want you to go ahead and do something, and they'll call you up and say, "Hey, you've got a virus on your machine. We're calling you from Apple support. We want you to go ahead and sit down and go to this link that we're going to give you, and just give us control, and we'll go ahead and clean that up for you." If you didn't call Apple support will never call you, right? So just take that into account that there's different methodologies that these malicious intruders are going ahead and trying to use for your machine. So what we're going to go into is, this is a short video of me going ahead and setting up a lab where I went ahead and grabbed the machine. At this point, I've already exploited the machine. Okay, so we're not going to go ahead and get into the details of how I did that, right? We're going to go ahead and say, at this point, someone's clicked on that phishing email. What this video usually I'm able to go ahead and demonstrate here is the post-exploitation of that box. So as you can see here in the video, the mouse is sort of trying to move. I just think with the audience that we have and whatnot, it's just lagging behind to go ahead and show you. But I'm able to, once I have post-exploitation of the box, I'm able to go ahead and insert whatever I want. I'm able to go ahead and actually review anything that's within the machine. Down to, at this point, your username and password would go ahead and show up on the console that you see here on the bottom. So, the gist of what's happening is this user goes ahead and clicks on that phishing email, and days later goes ahead and signs back into his machine, and I've already got control of his system. Once I go ahead and sit down and control his system, I'm able to see absolutely everything that's going on that machine. So we'll go ahead and sit down and move on because the video does not seem to be cooperating. So I'll go ahead and move on. So what we're seeing here, everyone's heard of ransomware, right? So this is a screenshot of me going ahead and within my lab playing with some ransomware and imploding it so that I can go ahead and sit down and do some forensic analysis of it. But I ended up going ahead and ransom locking the machine, which is fine. It was in a controlled environment. It wasn't on my network. It was able to go ahead and be done. But the reason I go ahead and sit down and wanted to go ahead and show you this, right, is it looks pretty legitimate. Some don't look as legitimate. Some of them are just text file and whatnot, and it gives you an account code and whatnot. But this was one of the more sophisticated attacks that I was investigating, right? And I just thought it was super important to go ahead and understand that all of this is just an attempt to go ahead and grab your money. right? So, with that, you go ahead and click on that phishing link. Basically, what ends up happening is you get a screen like this, and you have no access to any of your files. They're all encrypted. The hacker has basically control of not only your files, but your system at that point. And they request a certain amount of money. This one was $250 US dollars. But oftentimes, if they go ahead and find that it's a corporation and they do some research, that $250 turns into millions. And we all know from the Colonial Pipeline attack that it could go ahead and be very costly, both for the industry that you are in, but as well as the actual IS department, right? That could go ahead and sit down and take weeks, if not months, to recover there. So, any questions?
Yes, Felipe. So here we see. So we've seen a lot of news over the last 12 months related to ransomware. And one of the most talked about one, which is the one you mentioned, the Colonial Pipeline attack. What would you say are the top things that you or I could do to minimize being a victim?
I'd say the first thing to go ahead and keep in mind was the first thing I said, right? If it's too good to be true, it probably is. Don't click. But the second thing is make sure that your systems are up to date and that you have an antivirus solution, right? Or anti-malware, right? And what I mean by anti-malware is, you have next generation AVs out in the market that use machine learning and AI, not just virus signatures, to go ahead and detect things. And that type of introspection goes ahead and sits down and goes really far into going ahead and preventing this type of attack, because it can go ahead and sit down and say, hey, this file doesn't look right. It says it's Coke, but it's got the formula for Pepsi instead in that Coke bottle. It probably isn't Coke, and it'll go ahead and sit down and block all of that. So that would be my advice at this point.
What about backups? Backing up your data files and stuff like that. Anything you should do there?
So yeah, I mean, so backups are definitely a good thing to have. The thing that we're seeing with ransomware right now is that it's encrypting your backups, right? So it's going after not just your computer, but your backups. So we're going back to the old ages, right? In the old age, we would go ahead and do tape backups of systems and store them off site. It's a very similar thing, right? Make sure that your backups are not stored on the same network as your computers, right? And not just on a local network, but you're storing them offsite somehow, right? And keep your files safe, right? In this manner.
Sounds good.
All right. So protecting your credentials, right? We want to use a password vaulting program. We want to use randomly generated passwords with uppercase, lowercases, and numbers, right? And you can go ahead and see here, basically, a couple of things that we can go ahead and do just to protect ourselves. This one is another good one. Watch out for shoulder surfing, right? What ends up happening a lot of times is if you have a malicious inside user that wants to go ahead and sit down and grab that, they'll try to distract you somehow while you're going ahead and signing into your machine. Basically, what they're doing is either grabbing their phone or their camera or something and trying to shoulder surf and video, or if they've got a photographic memory, see what keys you're typing in. So never go ahead and type in any of your passwords while you have colleagues around you, right? I'm the first one that goes ahead and always says, do you mind giving me some space real quick while I go ahead and sign in? And at that point, they can go ahead and sit down and crowd around me once I'm in. So never use a link sent via email. You always verify. I got a really sophisticated attack that was tried on me on my personal account with an email that came from my wife's name. And when I went ahead and checked the link, right, It didn't look legitimate. But then I went ahead and started looking at the email, and the email, while the friendly name showing was my wife's email, it was not my wife's email. So always ask. And if you feel something's fishy, call the person, right? So immediately when I got that, I called my wife and I said, hey, do you really need me to process this payment? And she told me, no, I haven't sent you anything. So just trust but verify, right? And always use two-factor or multi-factor. More tips. Know how to avoid scams and these red flags that always come up, right? They're always going to start with something like, help us get in touch with you by keeping your contact information up to date, right? Review your account activity, right? Stay alert to those online threats and avoid clicking on those suspicious links. And never trust caller ID, right? You have to validate a person and that organization, calling them back through an official phone number, right? Just because they put it on an email or because a text message came, always trust but validate. Knowing how to identify those red flags, you're probably going to be pressured to send money. You're going to be threatened with law enforcement action, which, look at the ransomware example that I sent you. It looked legitimate, like the Department of Justice and the FBI were coming after you. You're told to purchase gift cards and provide codes as form of payment for something. You're asked to cash a check for a stranger or instructed to make a cash deposits for sweepstakes. None of those things should go ahead and sit down and happen. So always just take that with a grain of salt and understand that, again, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. So we're getting down to the final portion of the presentation. So what I decided to go ahead and sort of put up here is some of the software for purchase and for free that you can have. So if you're in a corporate environment, right, you have the ability to use everything on the left there: Cylance, Prisma, CyberArk, Checkpoint. You know, we've got different VPN users and different firewalls. CyberArk is a password vaulting / privileged access management platform. Cylance is one of those products that goes ahead and sits down and allows you to use machine learning and AI to protect your environments. Prisma is basically to go ahead and do an introspection for your cloud and your networks, right? But then on the right side, you have some of the consumer available products, right? So One Logon, One Password, RoboForm, LastPass. Windows Defender comes with every Windows laptop or desktop that you own. So Windows 10 bundled this in. It's actually pretty effective tool, right? Especially if you're in an enterprise environment, right? You have what's called Defender ATP, which is Advanced Threat Protection, and it leverages Microsoft's knowledge. But Defender has basically recently been very effective, right? Down to even some of the vulnerabilities that Windows has released have been mitigated with Defender rules. NordVPN is a VPN that you can go ahead and purchase as a consumer that goes ahead and allows you to go ahead and use a third party to VPN. And then Lookout is basically for mobile. Just note that Cylance does have a consumer product now, right, that you could go ahead and also use for antivirus. It's pretty powerful as well. So this is I just wanted to go ahead and give you some of the solutions out there that are available and at your grasp. And the last slide. Thank you for your time. And I'd like to go ahead and open it up to a Q&A session at this point.
So Felipe, we have just a couple questions. Most of the questions have been answered along the way. Here is one. I've been hearing a lot about hovering over links in emails. Can you explain what that is and why we should do it?
Yes, so that goes back to what I was explaining to you with my wife sending me an email, right, with a link. If you hover over the link, right, the links themselves could go ahead and have friendly names, right? So it'll say, click here for your bank login, right? But when you hover over it, it won't be bankunited.com. It'll go ahead and be, felipemedina.com or something like that. And that's key, right? If you hover over the link, it's going to tell you the true link that you're clicking on. Very effective tool for you to go ahead and use so that you don't get caught. The play here is never rush. If you can't get to the email at that very moment, maybe you shouldn't go ahead and be clicking around or doing anything with it, right? So never try to multitask, right? When you multitask, that's when you're going to go ahead and end up getting caught. So if you don't have time at that very moment to go ahead and sit down and be security conscious or mindful on an email that just came in, and you feel it's going to be rushed, you probably should just go ahead and pause, do away with the email at that point, and come back to it when you do have time. And the same thing with emails, right? Emails can go ahead and have friendly names. And those friendly names will go ahead and sit down and show you, like my wife's name. But when you hover over it, it'll go ahead and give you the true email. And if it's not that email, right, then you know it's not coming from the legitimate person. So that's really at the gist of why you want to go ahead and hover over links and emails to make sure that they are what they say they are.
Okay, sounds good. We're getting close to the end of our presentation. We have one quick question left. It says, is it advisable to change the passwords on the different devices we purchase? Example, a router or a smart device for our home? And if so, why?
Absolutely. Never keep default passwords. Never. Whether it's a console, whether it's your router, whether it's your MacBook or Windows computer, you should go ahead and change your passwords often, right? And you should never go ahead and leave the defaults. Why? It's a quick lookup for me to go ahead and get into your machine then, right? So if I go ahead and leave my router with admin, which is what it comes in as, that means that it doesn't matter whether or not I let you on my Wi-Fi or not. I can go ahead and sit down and see that router is broadcasting and try to go ahead and get into the admin console and not only change things around, but create my own Wi-Fi or my own network within your router that you will be completely unaware of. So always change those default passwords, never keep them. And if possible, change the default usernames as well, because those can go ahead and also be changed. Now, word of caution here, if you go ahead and do that for your internet provider's router and you're leasing that router, right, make sure that you keep the username and password, because otherwise, if you need to call up for support and you don't have that, they're going to factory reset everything and you're going to go ahead and start from scratch, having to go ahead and do everything. So make sure that you're going ahead and jotting down whatever you're doing, putting it in your vault. That way, if you need to call support, you can go ahead and give them that username and password. And right after that support session, you're going to want to go ahead and change the password again.
Thank you, Felipe. Very good advice. So I think that's it for the questions for today. We've pretty much come to the end of a very interesting presentation. Once again, we apologize for the technical difficulties we had in the beginning, but these things happen, and hope that everyone enjoyed the presentation. Thank you, Felipe, and thank you everyone for being here with us today. We look forward to seeing you and at all our next web series. Have a good day.
Thank you.